Big story coming in on India first. The United States has imposed additional sanctions on India, additional tariff. 25% additional tariffs have been put on India. Big story here on India first. The big question remains, what will India's response be? The United States had already spoken of 25% tariffs. Now, US President Donald Trump has slapped an additional 25% tariff on India in response to India's continued oil purchase from Russia. Donald Trump has just signed an executive order imposing the additional 25% tariff, and this effectively would take tariffs imposed on India to 50%. The statement that the US President Donald Trump has just put out says, by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the law of the United States of America, including the Emergency Economic Powers Act, to deal with the national emergency described in the Executive Order 14066. Donald Trump writes, I determine that it is necessary to appropriate to impose an additional duty on imports of articles of India, which is directly or indirectly importing Russian Federation oil. In my judgment, imposing tariffs as described below, in addition to maintaining the other measures taken to address national emergency described in the executive order. The big question remains, how is this a national emergency in the United States of America? Is Donald Trump misusing the emergency powers of the President of the United States to impose tariff? Because several analysts in the United States have also argued that imposition of tariff is the work of the US Congress and not the President. And is he using tariffs as a weapon to target sovereign democracies and force them into submission? The other big question on India, how will this 50% tariff impact Indian exports to the United States of America? What impact will this have on the comprehensive strategic partnership between India and the United States? Both India and the United States had actually put a lot in this relationship. They had invested very heavily in this relationship. Post the Pokhran nuclear test of 1998, then in 1999, when the Kargil war happened, then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and US President Bill Clinton in 2000, when they met, and subsequently, what was very popular in those times was something that was called as NSSP, Next Step in Strategic Partnership, between Dr. Manmohan Singh and George W. Bush. Now, I have the finest panel of experts who join me on India First to analyze these developments. I have Catherine Hada, former diplomat and senior associate chair on India and Emerging Asia Economies, joining us on the show. I have Craig Kafura, Director of Public Opinion and Foreign Policy at the Chicago Council of Global Affairs, joining me. Puneet Ahluwalia was a candidate to be Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. He's a Republican. He joins me on the show. Ambassador Vivek Karju, in just a moment, will join me. Siddharth Zarabi, Group Editor, Business. He joins me on this broadcast. And Siddharth, first to you, 25% additional tariff. Was it expected? Was India bracing for 50%? And what does this mean for India?
Gaurav, very clearly, this is the Russia penalty that he had threatened to levy. It's the same number as 25%, takes the total impact to 50%. The first part of 25% comes into effect as we speak, because that deadline was 7th August US time. And this additional 25% happens 21 days from this deadline, so 27, 28 of August. In effect, in the first week of August, forward by the beginning of September, all Indian exports to the United States will be 50% more expensive.
Okay.
Is this the end of it? Can 50 go up or down? We don't know, but it's going to have a clear-cut impact in the near and short term on Indian exports and the US consumer for a variety of goods categories.
So let's take this step by step. I also have Karishma joining us on this show. Karishma, India was bracing for this. India has effectively been able to grow at 6.5%, 7%, the RBI predictions. But with this, with 50%, how are markets likely to react? You've been speaking to analysts. What impact will this have short term and medium term?
Gaurav, we'll have to go by the year when it comes to watching how markets will react to this, because the 25% tariff that had just been announced 2 days back, strangely, the markets did not react much to it. There was a slight dip. They were flat on its opening, and they also pulled back again quickly, which also speaks of the fact that investors were prepared of this to happen. Definitely, when the whole announcement kicked off in April, it was the first time when President Donald Trump had introduced his idea of this tariff war across the countries, is when markets across APAC region reacted, be it Japan, be it China, or be it India. In terms of resilience in economy, if we talk about how RBI is looking at it, or how the government is looking at it, or even IMF, which released its recent global economic paper, they've all spoken of the fact that our economy is pretty resilient to take in these factors, and headwinds of geopolitical issues is something that India has been taking on for a while, and it's been maintaining its stance of growing at 6.5%. But the big question is an additional 25% tariff. Were we expecting that? We are currently at par with Brazil. We are one of the top, in the top 2 category of being imposed with these heavy tariffs, despite the fact that we had a first mover advantage, and it's going to majorly impact a lot of our sectors. We are talking about engineering goods, we are talking about electronic goods, we are talking about textiles, about gems and jewelries. We export all of this to the US. Currently, pharma looks something that needs to be discussed on, because we do not have clarity if these tariffs will be applicable on pharma or not, or will they be exempted under Section 232.
So stay with me. Let's take the initial, responses as this development is just taking place, and we'll go sector by sector. There are some analysts in the United States who've argued that Donald Trump is shooting himself in the foot. Is he actually doing that? Is he throwing this relationship away? Both India and the United States had invested so heavily in this relationship. But Ambassador Karju, your first response to this news coming in: Donald Trump has signed an executive order, additional 25% tariff on India for buying Russian oil.
Look, I think what we said 2 days ago when he threatened to impose these tariffs, that all this was unreasonable and unjustified, was entirely correct. Countries look after their national interests, and we've been doing the same thing with regard to purchase of Russian oil. The problem that I foresee, Gaurav, and I'm going to be candid with you, is that our diplomacy over the last decade has been conducted in a very personalized way. It has been projected as the pursuit of personal chemistry. This particular case shows us the limitations of personal chemistry when it comes to the pursuit of national interest. Why do I say it? And give me 1 second for this, because I think it's important. You see, leaders are responsible ultimately to their electorates. I think Trump, in his own strange, what I consider to be totally quote unquote mad way, thinks he is responsible to those who have supported him, his MAGA group, right? And he is not bothered about personal friendships, even if he may say so and so is my friend. We have to be equally cold blooded. The problem I see is that over the last 10 years, we've hemmed ourselves in. And now we'll have to be very nimble, very adroit in breaking these, in going over these geopolitical hurdles that we've created. Because let us not forget that the statement that we issued clubbed Europe and the United States together.
Yes.
When, if I may say, the casus belli, if I may use that word, was really the Americans. The Europeans are being hypocritical, yes, but they've not imposed tariffs. So if I were there, I would have focused narrowly 2 days
On the
ago
United States.
on the United States, not on the Europeans, because today I may need the Europeans more than any other time. Now, as far as China is concerned, today has been announced that Prime Minister is going to China. Yes, we have in the past always followed this policy of multi-alignment. But we know our difficulties with China, whatever we may say after 2020. So with Russia, we cannot abandon them. Whatever Trump may say, we've got to now bite the bullet. We've got to get the political class together. We've got to get
Okay.
the nation together, and that will require great statesmanship on both the part of the government and the opposition. Because don't
That India
underrate
speaks
this
in one
challenge.
voice.
Yes, and my last point here, Siddharth, and Siddharth will be able to correct me, but it is not only a question of these tariffs having an impact on our commercial and economic ties with the United States. They might have a bearing on our commercial and economic ties elsewhere too. And that is
Very
what is my
interesting.
concern. But if I'm wrong, I'll be delighted. But let Siddharth say
I'll come
something.
to Siddharth. I'll come to Siddharth. And Siddharth, you must respond to what Ambassador Kaju argues or is putting forward that point. Will this also have a wider impact? But I also quickly want to bring in Craig Kafura into this conversation. And Puneet Ahluwalia also joins me from the United States. Craig Kafura, the impression in the developing world is that Donald Trump wants submission. He does not want a win-win deal. He wants a Trump wins, everyone submits kind of a deal.
I don't think that's an incorrect reading of how the administration is going about this. The administration seems very clear that it's willing to impose substantial economic pain on other countries in exchange for imposing slightly less economic pain on itself. But I have to say, this approach really isn't a popular one if you look at polls done among the American public. Most Americans now disapprove of Trump's handling of tariffs and foreign trade. Our own polls at the Chicago Council find that most Americans now support pursuing a policy of free trade instead of trying to do these tariff carve-outs and trade wars. So although Trump's certainly pursuing his agenda, it's really not resonating much with the public at home.
Okay. Puneet Ahluwalia, sanctions on India and not on China, which is actually the largest, country buying largest amount of oil from Russia. Clearly, as Henry Kissinger warned, to be America's friend is fatal.
Well, Gaurav, first thing is it's a pivotal moment for India to do. It's important for India to show that they want to be a strong partner to the United States. As a proud Indian American, I feel that we should not be at this moment, or India should not be at this moment where it is. I think President Trump he's fulfilling his campaign promise. Whatever you're seeing is basically he had said it many times and he's doing that. And secondly, President Trump was expecting a deal out of India long before. I think India should have been the first or the second one to come out and strike a deal with India. But I guess there's a miscalculation on the part of the negotiators because they negotiated themselves out of the deal. At the same time, I agree with the ambassador earlier that this is going to have a ripple effect, just not on the relationship between US and India, but on Indians and the diaspora and Indian interest all around, because you know how President Trump gets. It's not submission. I disagree with the word. President Trump is looking for fair and balanced trade. He's a unifier.
How
he
is
wants
this
to
fair
unify.
and balanced? How is this fair and balanced?
Well, so Gaurav, you see, you want to have reciprocal trade, okay? And that's what folks have to focus on. Again, Gaurav, you're looking from the Indian perspective, and that's the reason why the missed opportunity that the 5 times they met and they were not able to chalk a deal. That's what you need to do is what you really think is look and think from the American perspective, the president's perspective, to come and find a way to chalk a deal, which is a win for both.
He wanted a
United
big
States and
headline.
India.
May I respond to that, Gaurav?
Absolutely, Ambassador. Puneet Ahluwalia, I'm just bringing Ambassador Kaju to respond to you before I bring in Siddharth and Karishma into this conversation. But go ahead, sir.
Look, all through after the Second World War, it was understood that developing countries had special needs. Our situation, we are the world's largest country by population.
Yes, sir.
50% of our people are involved in agriculture, which contributes only 15% of our GDP. We cannot, no government in India can give up their interests. There are certain sectors in agriculture we simply cannot open up immediately. That is what Trump wanted. We can't open up corn, we can't open up soya beans, we can't open up dairy. We can't. No government can. And till now, the Western world understood this. This was the basis of the WTO. And Siddharth will correct me again. I'm no expert in this, but I understand so much. I've remained a diplomat all my life. This much I understand, that this was the very basis of the WTO and the basis of international trade. Today, Trump says that a developed country and a developing country are on par. There is nothing like history. Trump refuses to accept the existential crises of our times. He refuses to look at climate change. He is absolutely, if I'm sorry to say, that we have a bizarre person as president of the world's most powerful country who doesn't understand the
he was still elected.
of the planet that we are. Yes, and that is the tragedy. That there is a vast section of the
you will
American
see the
electorate
positivity
who
in.
have to face that.
Honorable
No, there is
Ambassador,
no positivity, Puneet Ahluwalia, with due respect.
No,
when
we as
America
Americans
and India, two of the world's most powerful democracies, the oldest and the largest democracies, and President Trump cannot
Let's look at the bottom
appreciate
line,
what
Gaurav,
is India's basic red line.
Gaurav, let's get past that. India has now become a large economy, and it's a growing economy. And if you define yourself, either you're a developing economy or you have achieved where you need to go. But we're not here to do that. What's important is let's sharpen our pencils and find a way to make this deal. As I say, that this is going to have it's a pivotal moment for India, and it's going to have a ripple effect on multiple fronts. So you can bash up Trump, you can have all the polls you want to do it, but he's the president, he's the one and then he has a set of advisors who really want to see this relationship blossom, but at the same time, there are other forces at work that want to see the relationship really not go on a downward spiral. That's my biggest concern, and I've been watching this very closely, and unfortunately not part of the negotiation to help India find a path to mitigate this relationship. But the fact is that all that has been done so far has to be wiped clean by Prime Minister Modi. Find a new way to get and reach out to President Trump, and let's have a deal. This is the time to make a deal.
Let's have a deal,
otherwise,
which is a win-win. It cannot be President Trump wins and India loses.
I agree with that. It's got to be. Look, I was born in India. I'm proud of my heritage, but I think the deal has to be done. Ambassador said very correctly, yes, it's about personalities. I think both Modi and Trump has personality, but don't be a tough negotiator and negotiate yourself out of the deal. I think there's still a possibility. And I believe that the folks should really get and sharpen their pencils and find a way to make this thing work.
And Puneet, I want you to stay on with me, Puneet Ahluwalia. Siddharth, you want to quickly respond. Is no deal better than a bad deal if you look at it from the Indian perspective? I want you to respond to that. But there's breaking news that's just coming in. We've just got a reaction from Shashi Tharoor on US President Trump imposing an additional 25% tariff on India. Congress MP Shashi Tharoor says, and I quote, "I don't think it's a particularly good news for us that takes our total tariffs to 50%, and that's going to make our goods unaffordable to a lot of people in America." And in particular, when you're looking at these percentages, you have to compare them with the tariff being levied on some of our competitors. I'm afraid that if you look at people like countries like Vietnam or Indonesia or Philippines, even Bangladesh and Pakistan have lower tariffs than us, then ultimately people will not be buying goods from us in America if they can buy them cheaper elsewhere. So that's not very good for our exports to America. This means we need to seriously diversify to other countries and other markets that may be interested in what we have to offer. We now have an FTA with the UK. We are now talking to the EU. There are many countries in which hopefully we will be able to, but in the short term, it's definitely a blow. But there's a reaction that's coming in. Let's listen in.
I don't think that's particularly good news for us, but obviously if that takes our total tariffs to 50%, then that's going to make our goods unaffordable to a lot of people in America. And in particularly when you're looking at these percentages, you have to compare them with the tariffs being levied on some of our competitors. And I'm afraid if you look at people like Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, even Bangladesh and Pakistan have lower tariffs than us, then ultimately people will not be buying goods from us in America if they can buy them cheaper elsewhere. So that's not very good for our exports to America. This means we need to very seriously diversify to other countries and other markets which may be interested in what we have to offer.
Siddharth, we need to diversify, no two ways about it. But, Ambassador Kaju asked whether Trump tariffs will have an impact overall, not just on India-US relationship, but will this have a cascading effect?
Gaurav, it's your show, but a question to Puneet, which can be answered later. Why are there no sanctions on China, despite being the largest buyer of Russian crude oil? The answer really, Gaurav, to combine both those questions is the fact is that as far as India is concerned, it's the only country in the present time that President Trump has chosen to penalize for importing Russian crude oil. The only one. There are threats for China, nothing about the European Union. So clearly, it is not a rational piece of economic decision making. And while Puneet Ahluwalia seems to suggest that, we negotiated ourselves out of it, sorry, that's not going to happen. We are not going to sacrifice the economic security, well-being and livelihood of 500 million Indians for Americans. That's not going to happen, simply not. You can sell us blueberries, that's fine, but you're not going to send us wheat, rice or soya and so many other products, out of the question. Now, in response to what Mr. Kaju said, I do not see an immediate impact beyond what will be a disruption in terms of supplies to the United States, because as far as exports to America are concerned, as part of India's GDP, it's a very small number. So let's not blow out the American threat out of context. Yes, it will hurt certain sectors, but it will hurt American consumers more.
And is it already hurting some of the American consumers? Nike,
Gaurav,
Adidas.
Gaurav, if I might just say that I'm very reassured by what Siddharth has said.
Absolutely, sir.
And President Trump responded to the real data by firing the head of the agency that was supposed to come up with real data. So nothing more to be said, frankly.
And is this then, as they say in the American parlance, to the mattresses, is it down to trench warfare when it comes to a very strong strategic partnership that both countries have put so much into? Catherine Hara also joins me on the broadcast. Catherine Hara, in your appreciation, what do you make of this additional 25% tariff that's been imposed through this executive order? How resilient is the India-US strategic partnership in the face of this tariff dispute?
I think actually you're asking exactly the right question. I believe, I've been involved in trade negotiations in the past. This one's obviously a tough one. The United States has its own red lines traditionally. We have something called the Jones Act that prevents shipping, for example, within the continental United States by foreigners. That's been a bone of contention with partners over the years. I kind of think it would be possible to get a deal. I'm sensing what the White House wants. I'm not a White House insider, but some sort of headline that shows some new kind of deal. I hear now that India is looking, for example, on dairy products. I know that's a red line, but having lived in India, aged cheeses, for example, if you were to import United States aged cheeses, I don't think that's really going to harm the Indian market. So I think it's really a matter for negotiators to find the flexibility. Quite frankly, I'm just more worried about what this says about how brittle the relationship is becoming and how personalized. I'm a diplomat of 32 years. I do believe it's important to have a variety of issues on the table. We just did a joint space initiative, which is very exciting. I think that this White House has narrowed the scope of what we're talking about to get deals, to get trade, but everyone knows we have a vibrant NRI community in the United States, our people-to-people ties. Everyone knows one of the strengths of this relationship has been its broadness. And this is where you get in trouble when you're narrowing it down just to trade, just to defense, which is important. I think we can reach the trade agreement. I'm a little more worried about suddenly Pakistan being an issue between our countries. And it's going to take some work to get us on track and some commitment to do that.
Because it would be very sad if that suspicion of the 1970s was to creep back in a relationship that all sides have invested so much into. When we were covering the Kargil war, and then when the relationship was being built from NSSP to the civil nuclear deal to the comprehensive strategic partnership, both sides have invested so much in it. And is Donald Trump just throwing it all out of the window on a whim? Okay, I have more breaking news coming in. Donald Trump has just said that the order may be modified if India retaliates against US. Condition for modification, including in light of additional information, recommendation from senior officials or changed circumstances. So is this then a hint that it could even go beyond the 50%? Is this hinting that there could be further escalation, modification? What's the second ground? He says, should a foreign country retaliate against the United States in response to this action? Does that mean if Russia does something, there'll be more sanctions on India? Where is Donald Trump actually taking this relationship? Now, the third condition that he's putting forward is, should the government of the Russian Federation or a foreign country align sufficiently with the United States or on national security? So is that the hint, Ambassador Kaju, if Russia meets the deadline or if Russia walks the talk on either ceasefire or engages with the US the way Trump wants, then these sanctions could come down? But what does this really mean? He's making India-US relationship dependent on the outcome of Russia's relationship with the US.
You are entirely correct. I think we are dealing with a very frustrated American president who had thought that once he got, if I'm sorry to use the word, once he had whipped Zelensky into line, because that is what they virtually did during that White House meeting with Zelensky, Putin will be very happy and Putin will agree. Putin, on the other hand, has gone maximalist. He is saying, please give me in writing that Ukraine will never join NATO, Ukraine will never be a part of EU, it will be within the Russian sphere of influence, and the 4 areas we have, or regions, we have amalgamated constitutionally, the world will recognize them, America will recognize them. Trump is obviously cannot agree to this, the world will not agree to this. So there's an impasse there. If there's an impasse there, whom is he finding as the whipping boy?
Yes.
It's India. His anger is being directed against India when it should be with Putin, against Putin. So what is he with the Chinese? He's not doing it. He is on the verge, at least that's what it appears, on reaching some kind of a deal with the Chinese. So the Chinese he's very, very careful with. But India is, I'm sorry to say, for him at the moment, a soft target. And he
thinks we are a soft target until he sees the real, and if I sincerely hope, the real face of India in the face of any situation like this.
You are absolutely right, Gaurav. That is why I said this is a time for national unity, for the political class, the government and the opposition to come together and to say, we do not accept blackmail from anyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Craig Kafura, prices in the US, according to some reports that I was reading, are already either increasing or will be increasing soon. There are companies like Nike and Adidas, they say input costs going up, their prices will go up. Coffee prices, since the taxes on coffee from Brazil is going up, they're saying coffee prices will go up. Is the American public, will they be okay with it? Or with the MAGA crowd backing Trump, he'll follow this through all the way?
I think it depends on what part of the public you're looking at. I mean, there are some really committed MAGA ideologues out there who say they're willing to bear a lot of economic pain, but I'm not sure how deep that goes. And you're right, we are starting to see prices rise. Inflation looks like it's been running about 3% a month for the last several months, and we're starting to see an economic slowdown. So you mentioned earlier things coming back from the 70s. We might be in for another round of stagflation if this keeps up, right? We're imposing greater costs on ourselves through these international tariffs. We're also imposing costs on ourselves through these immigration crackdowns. We're deporting parts of our workforce. So we're hurting ourselves on both ends here in the United States. Now, if that's going to have a real impact on political debates in the White House, I think remains to be seen. It will definitely have an impact on the midterm elections. You're already seeing Democrats running really strongly in all of these sort of off-cycle, local, state-level races. I would expect Democrats to be set up for a really strong midterm election. And then maybe they'll see about taking back some of these trade policies, right? These are not inherent powers of the president. These are delegated to the president by Congress. Congress can take them back if they so choose.
Okay, you mentioned the Democrats, and I have Crystal Call of the Democratic Party joining me on this special broadcast. Crystal Call, your appreciation, Indians have traditionally been voters of the Democrats, for the Democrats, and we also saw that Ab Ki Baar Trump Sarkar campaign, because the hope was perhaps under Donald Trump or under Republicans, the relationship between the two countries would even be stronger. That clearly doesn't seem to be happening in Trump 2.0. What's your appreciation of what Donald Trump is doing, imposing an additional 25% tariff on India and threatening it could be raised even higher?
Well, this is exactly what I brought up in my campaign. I think that there has always been a misperception amongst Indian Americans that Trump is pro-India, pro-Indian Americans, and that's clearly not the case. And I think that, India needs to understand that Trump has, one agenda. They're trying to counter Russia. Trump is not someone who understands context and nuance and geopolitics, in my opinion. And this is detrimental to the U.S.-India relationship. It's detrimental to the future of trade between these two nations. I mean, you're dealing with India, the fastest growing economy in the world. And frankly, it's taken so much since the U.S.-India nuclear deal to bring these countries closer together, right? The oldest and the largest democracies in the world. And I think it's just tragic, all the work that's been done from, President Clinton, from President Obama, President Biden, till date, that's just being undermined by, frankly, an impulsive decision, one that's illogical and one that will have ramifications, for as long as this is imposed, and especially if it goes up. And for what? I mean, this is just a threatening tactic. That's what Trump does. He uses these tactics, to basically say, to signal India, that they can't have any trade or any relations with Russia, right? Which is impossible. You'd be undoing years of a relationship that has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with India being communist leaning. And this has been the problem with the U.S.-India relationship from the inception of India. There is non-alignment.
And our External Affairs Minister has tried to explain this, because it's the Americans who are getting closer to Pakistan. It's the Americans who are arming Pakistan. That's one reason that India was forced to buy weapons from then Soviet Union. And it goes on. But Puneet Ahluwalia, respond to Crystal Call saying Donald Trump does not really understand the nuances of India-US relationship and all that investment made in the past quarter of a century, 25 long years plus, is, God forbid, it may just be thrown out of the window.
Well, Crystal is not clear about Donald Trump's capability, because he really reached out to various facets of different communities and got elected president. But at the same time, he was the first guy who brought peace in Middle East. Look at the Abraham Accord. He was the first guy who reached out to North Korea. So it's not that he wants to use his personal relationship. Look at the dynamics between President Trump and Modi. Please don't discount his ability to reach out and work with world leaders. The important thing is he is very business focused. He looks at the bottom line. At this point, he wants to find a way to mitigate peace with Ukraine and Russia. And he wants to find a way to starve Russia and its financial supporters. Same thing he's doing with Israel and Iran. And that's the other thing, is that unfortunately, or India does business with both Iran and Russia. So there are more dynamics that meets the eye, but please don't discount his ability to what Crystal said. But more importantly, as I said earlier, and a lot of folks want to talk about, there's still an important piece. Find a way to sharpen your pencils, find a way to mitigate. And if you think it's going to be a big headliner, that'll help to bring this relationship together. But if you retaliate, I can guarantee you it'll have a ripple effect and the numbers are going to go up. And then it'll be even far worse for us to climb back out, or the Indians to climb back out. And as a proud Indian American, I feel it's very important that the better sense prevails. Let's not negotiate. As I said again, don't negotiate yourself out of a deal. That's my 2 cents.
Okay.
Can I just add one thing to this? Just
Yes, please.
Which is that, the United States, one thing I really do regret is the unpredictability that this administration is showing on trade. You can say it's justified to rebalance our trade. I think what's really harmful is that the United States has always been a country of its word. And I can tell you, having lived around the world, what that means. And in this case, for example, there's a certain amount of whiplash, I think, that the Indian side is perceiving that's not irrational, which is that, for example, encouraging India to be a new base for manufacturing away from China and then slapping down India for exporting iPhones, or talking about reaching a trade deal, but then in the next minute, talking that there may be a 250% tariff placed on pharma. Would that be included in a trade deal or not? Our trade partners are also confused, even with what was agreed to in some cases. So I do think we need some clarity and certainty coming from the White House as well. I wouldn't put this all on India by any means.
No, but
Yeah,
I
and the
would think
lack of
none of this
clarity
should
I'd like
be
to
on
just
India.
respond as well.
Yes, please do before I bring in
Fine,
Siddharth Zarabi and Karishma, but
thank you.
please do, Crystal.
Yeah, I just want to highlight, I mean, I'm only going off the facts, right? August 7th, tomorrow, this 25% tariff is going to be placed on India. So, I mean, regardless of whatever's happened in the past or whatever perceptions are, I'm going off the basic fact. I mean, this is detrimental to the relationship of these two countries. And Catherine, I appreciate your views. I used to work for the South Asia division at CSIS, and this has taken so much for these two countries to come together. So you can't just make a power move like that because you're the US on not just India, but so many countries around the world as a threatening tactic. I mean, that's just not how our global independence and geopolitics and trade works. And it's going to hurt Americans in the end of the day.
Absolutely, because as an Indian, I would think, how much can I really trust America if this is how a comprehensive strategic partnership partner behaves with me when I want to be friends with you? I want a good trade deal. Isn't it, Siddharth? Prime Minister Narendra Modi was amongst the first of the bloc getting to the United States, talking about a deal by fall. 5 rounds have happened. For the 6th round, the Americans are to come to India on the 25th of August. But before that, this 50% and this threat of additional, is this pressure tactics? Do a deal on my terms, or the next round, the tariffs would even be higher?
Gaurav, Indian officials have been very tight-lipped and very calm and composed, and have not over the past 5-6 months done any planting of news of any kind. Yet I must now say, and one can reveal this, the US approach during the conversations left many of our negotiators confused. They would be sitting in a room discussing something, trying to explain their concerns, but the US attitude was take it or leave it.
Yes.
And people virtually leaving the room, next day they see a tweet which goes in some other direction from the political head of the country, the executive head of the country. So it's not been easy talking to the US officials. And by the way, we've been circumspect talking about it. Go look at what the Japanese have said on record. Look at Switzerland. Look at so many other countries. They don't even know who they are talking to and what the United States wants from a so-called partner country. If we engage for so much time, and if agriculture was such an issue, why not do a piecemeal by piecemeal deal? India repeatedly put on the table that we can do a early harvest kind of early bilateral trade pact by October, November, and we can keep talking about the rest over the remaining months. Yet you want all of it in one day. That's not going to happen. You cannot push around India like this. And I think while there may be short-term pain, certain sectors, certain exports will get impacted, but we have gone through this pain delivered by the United States in the past. a few times, and I don't think that's going to change. So I strongly disagree with this feeling or this voice on our show, and with all respect, I say that we have to change and we have to make a deal. Sorry, if it was left to me, no deal is better than losing self-respect and your own standing.
You know, that's the question I'd put to Ambassador Kaju, if I may. Is no deal better than a bad deal? You know, India would want a bilateral trade agreement with the United States of America, but it can't be US wins, India loses, and compromise on our red lines. That clearly no government, no prime minister can afford.
I think you are absolutely right, Gaurav. No prime minister of India, no political leader can give up the interests of, as we know, 50% of our people. There is a fundamental difference between the American economy and us. Yes, we are growing at a very rapid pace, but we have still vast grinding poverty. And that
Yes.
is the first concern of any Indian political leader. It has to be. And that is something which I find that the President Trump just doesn't seem to understand. Point one. Point two, I think the the years since 1947 and the India-American relationship as it has evolved, and I, for one, favor a good relationship between us and the Americans. I think all this should have, uh, I'm sorry to use the word, taught the Americans that there is a certain
Okay,
resilience
sir,
in
give me a
India.
moment. Siddharth Zarabi is getting us the first reaction from government of India. Siddharth, take it away.
The operative part, it is extremely unfortunate that the US should choose to impose additional tariffs on India for actions that several other countries are also taking in their own national interest. We reiterate that these actions are unfair, unjustified and unreasonable. India will take all actions necessary to protect national interest, and the statement also says we have already made clear our position on these issues, including the fact that our imports are for the energy security of 1.4 billion people. This is a statement by the official spokesperson in the context and headline, the United States has in recent days targeted India's oil imports from Russia. So that's the reaction that we were talking about.
And it's such an unfortunate targeting of India, Craig Kafura. You know, when you have a strategic partner, you take the strategic partner's concerns on board when you're working towards a deal, or your conversations are behind the scenes and should remain so. The moment they come out in public as broad headlines, and when you have two very strong leaders, the relationship is only likely, especially on the aspect of trade, go downhill.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, you're not the only country that's getting treated this way. I mean, look at how Trump has treated Japan, America's key ally in East Asia, the South Koreans, another key ally. The entire European Union has been treated like this. So this is just one in a pattern of the way that Trump deals with foreign countries and foreign trade. And I'm not surprised that your negotiators have been frustrated and confused, because the US approach to trade under Trump has always been frustrating and confusing. And frankly, I agree. You do need to find and diversify other sources. The good thing is you've got a long list of countries now that are looking for other markets. The United States is giving them no reason to trust them for future trade negotiations. So go talk to the Europeans, go talk to the Japanese, go talk to the South Koreans, go talk to the Indonesians. They've all got problems with the United States now. They've all got markets and people and capital looking for places to go. Trump is just pushing other countries away into each other's arms. And frankly, the biggest beneficiary of all of these trade fights is and is continuing to be China. China is now able to
Absolutely, and why would Donald Trump not understand that? Why would Donald Trump not understand that is the big question. The biggest beneficiary will ultimately end up being China. But Ambassador Kaju, in your appreciation, will this actually impact the overall India-US strategic partnership when it comes to security cooperation, when it comes to our strategic partnership? Will all of that, Catherine Hara, in your view, also be impacted? You know this region, you've served in India, your appreciation, will this impact the overall relationship?
Well, I can't see that it won't impact. I've seen some rough times in the relationship, so have you, and it's distressing to see how fast it can come apart. That being said, I still think there's room for an off-ramp even on this negotiation. I suggested, for example, on dairy, on GMOs. That's another thing. For some reason, India seems to have trade barriers that really were set up as protectionist, in my view, by the EU. There's no health risk to GMOs. It's been decades now. So I do think if both sides really wanted an agreement, we could get an agreement. I think the bigger question is, now that it's inflamed like this, who steps back and say what the bigger picture is and what we have to gain? Not just China. Everyone always looks at the risk of China, but the risk to the benefit of our overall relationship. Those people-to-people ties, IT, real coordination and innovation, space, health is an area that seems to have fallen off the agenda. There's so much we can be talking about other than
Absolutely.
China.
No, but the point is when you say who will back out first, but India's done nothing to aggravate the situation. US wanted India to buy that oil. You have, Ambassador Garcetti is on record to say this: buy oil from there, refine it, export it to the world. That's exactly what India is doing. So where is India wrong? Why is Donald Trump behaving this way?
With respect, India has been on the wrong side, in my view, of the Russia war for a while now. And I do think if maybe there were officials who said buy oil, I can remember our then Defense Secretary Austin saying, by all means, don't buy Russian oil. So I think it's not.
No, but where else do you get them? Why should that war be more important? I mean, that's not India's war. We didn't start that fight. We didn't start the fire. Why should the Indian taxpayer or the Indian middle class or the Indian poor suffer for that war between Russia and Ukraine?
See, I can't get behind that kind of an argument. I think you have to kind of look at who's the aggressor and who's not. But we don't have to relitigate
Right now,
this.
it's the US that's the aggressor against India on trade, is my, if I may. But will it... Go on, ma'am. Please complete your point. Go on, ma'am.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's helpful to relitigate. My own point is, though, that I can understand the whiplash now, whereas before, even with the first, Biden administration saying you shouldn't buy Russian oil, that did not detract from the overall relationship, even with the UN.
So tell me this, Catherine. No, Catherine Hara, just tell me this. India should not buy Russian oil, but European Union should continue to buy Russian LNG, and America should continue to buy uranium from and chemicals and fertilizers from Russia, and continue to fund that war.
I'm actually trying to say something in support of India's position on this, but not that. Not buying the Russian oil, but why the reversal and why directed only at India. And I don't think it's helpful. So I do agree with you on that, even though I do not agree that India had no choice but to buy Russian oil or to vote as it did or not vote in the UN. I believe that India's been on the wrong side of this issue, but that's not an excuse. I will say just one thing, because I'm almost getting to the point where I'm being required to counter a little bit. Your trade negotiators are known to be tough negotiators. And there are a lot of Washington negotiators who have a long history of negotiating. I think it's time for, flexibility on everyone's part. I can see that it is possible to get an agreement. What I'm more worried about is the backlash.
Okay. Ambassador Kajju, in your appreciation, will this impact the overall relationship? Healthcare is something that Catherine Hara was talking about. Strategic partnership, military hardware. If I were to go back once again to 1998 and where suspicions about United States were huge, I'm not even going back to the Henry Kissinger-Nixon era, our entire Sea King and Sea Harrier fleet was grounded because the Americans imposed sanctions on us, and that adversely impacted India's defense preparedness. Many in the armed forces said never buy American military hardware, especially critical military hardware, sir. Are we going back to that times?
I think there are segments of industry in India and in the United States. There are segments within the security sector in both countries who would favor the continuance of a strong relationship. I think there is bipartisan support in the US Congress on a strong relationship. But there is one aspect which is worrying me. And that is, Gaurav, and I would urge you to have a look at the US State Department statement, which came after Ishaq Dar's meeting on July 25th, with the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. In that statement, the US expressed great appreciation
Yes,
for Pakistan,
imagine.
which was acting, according to them, as an intermediary with Iran in continuing American
Yes.
conversations with
So give me a
Iran.
moment. There's breaking news coming in. We have the inside account of what's happening on India's strategy. Sources are telling us that the Prime Minister's office is to review the impact with the Ministry of External Affairs and with the Commerce Ministry. Government sources are telling India today energy imports, including Russian oil, will not be impacted. There are no US sanctions on Russia, so no change for India. Remember when sanctions were put on Iran, and those were US sanctions, India did not take oil from Iran. There are no sanctions on Russia. Tariff seen as US protectionism and not strategic threat to India to respond. And India, that's what sources are telling India today. So it's not strategic threat. What is India saying? That India to respond very calmly, India to protect trade and economic interests. So that's India's approach. What are your sources telling you?
And what we are picking up from the official statement and my colleague Chetan Bhutani in Business Today, what he's picking up and reporting, it's clear that as of now, there is no rollback on the continuing purchase of Russian crude oil. I think that's the headline that should be read in between all the print that we are seeing on this. There is no walking back on that. So if President Trump feels that he's going to ignite a trade war with India, I don't think we are going to either speak like the Chinese or behave like the Brazilians.
Okay.
It's very clear that this penalty imposed specifically on Russian crude oil has had a response which says that Russian crude imports into India will continue, Gaurav.
There's a big reaction that's coming in from Leader of Opposition in Lok Sabha. Rahul Gandhi has reacted. Rahul Gandhi has also said imposition of 50% of tariff is bullying tactics. The Prime Minister should not let down India's national interest. India should not buckle under US pressure. Karishma, that's a strong reaction that comes in from the Leader of Opposition, which in turn, Karishma, would actually embolden the government's stance. This is India virtually speaking in one voice.
Absolutely, Gaurav. In fact, it has been for a while, which Siddharth was also reiterating, that India has taken a very calm and composed way out. Let's not forget that the whole theatrics of how a very classic Trump tariff move has been seen. It's like a deja vu. Back in 2018, they had done similarly with China. Back in 2020, around 2023, before in the new election era, they had done this with EU, and then they had to roll back all the tariffs, and now it's India. So it's a very classic move. They've done this with China, they've done this with EU, where they punish and then they offer you a deal on the negotiation table.
Is that the template? Is that what will happen? We'll be tracking that story very, very closely. To all my very well-respected guests for joining me on this special broadcast, many thanks. Indications from India. India does not buckle under pressure. We'll track that story very closely.